morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, whether you're here in person or watching on YouTube. Welcome. Welcome to Westside Unitarian Universalist Church. We are a religious, spiritual, or fellowship, depending on how you think about it, community that welcomes all diversity of beliefs, cosmologies, theologies. Welcome. I'm Suzanne Molnar, member of the Worship Committee, and I'm the Worship Associate for today. Today's service, I think, reaches to what for many of us is kind of the heart of the UU dilemma. That is, what is being spiritual, or what is spirit if you have a cosmology that does not include a divinity or any other supernatural forces. Spiritual, science, anyway. This is presented by Dr. David Howell, who is a retired professor of philosophy and world religions. So, authority. Announcements. I believe no matter whether you're here in person or looking at virtually, you have them in front of you, so I'm not going to read through them, but I'd call your attention to things that need to stand out. Today's yoga class has been canceled. It'll return June 12th, so that's 2 weeks from now. Our second Monday lunch is Monday, the 13th of June. Information is printed in front of you. Ongoing religious exploration offerings, thinking about theology, Wednesdays, and joining for Thursday evening conversations. Open topics. Our next Earth Magic meeting, now this one is coming up, is June 5th, 3 o'clock. Reverend Carol producing an Earth-centered gathering each month close to the new moon. So if you're interested in that, be aware, it's coming up. The book club, announcement about that, read it. And finally, Spirit Quest. I have never attended a Spirit Quest, so I'm going to ask David to say a couple words about it because he has.
Oh, okay.
I know, I forgot to give you warning. Mea culpa maxima.
Yes, I went to it 2 years ago, I guess 2 years ago this summer, and we went to the Smokies, which is in some manner a spiritual place, and did all kinds of activities together and separately, and I found it a most enjoyable weekend.
And are there any other announcements? Then we'll have our gathering music by Sandra Thomas.
I was asked to be careful about raising this so you could all hear me. Suzanne is shorter than I, so she has to lower it. Our first spiritual moment, I think, in our services is the ringing of the Tibetan singing bowl. Take a brief breath, sit, center yourself, look around or close your eyes, whatever works for you. And now we will light the chalice. My worship associate has something to read while I do that.
This is from The Way of Chuang Tzu as arranged by Thomas Merton, a collection of stories. This one is The Wood Carver. King, the master carver, made a bell stand of precious wood. When it was finished, all who saw it were astounded. They said it must be the work of spirits. The Prince of Lu said to the master carver, "What is your secret?" King replied, "I am only a workman. I have no secret. There is only this. When I began to think about the work you commanded, I guarded my spirit, did not expend it on trifles that were not to the point. I fasted in order to set my heart at rest. By the time all thoughts of your highness and of the court had faded away, all that might distract me from my work had vanished. I was collected in the single thought of the bell stand. Then I went to the forest to see the trees in their own natural state. When the right tree appeared before my eyes, the bell stand also appeared. In it, clearly beyond doubt, all I had to do was put forth my hand and begin. If I had not met this particular tree, there would have been no bell stand at all. What happened? My own collected thought encountered the hidden potential in the wood. From this live encounter came the work which you ascribe to the spirits. We'll now take the morning offering for the very material needs of the church. As always, 25% of otherwise undesignated funds go to our partner, and this quarter it's the Unitarian Universalist Association.
That's better. When Suzanne gave the bit about the offering, I was listening. It did strike me, she said, to serve the material needs for the church, but it also serves the spiritual needs of the church. And that's part of what I want to talk about, is that material and spiritual are not somehow separate or different things. Each one is very often a reflection of the other. So what I want to talk about today began BC, that is before COVID, when there was a, thank you, when there was a discussion group that Reverend Bordeaux started talking about spirituality. And until that ended, I did think about spirituality. But it was a difficulty for me. I don't believe in supernatural beings of any kind. I don't believe in supernatural powers of every kind. Emphasis on super here. Super means above or better. As if it's super, then that's somehow better than just plain ordinary natural. And I didn't think that was the case. I thought natural things could be super as well. And that's one reason why I gave the title of this as Spirituality for a Scientist. We have some scientists among us. I'm looking at one at the moment, and I hope to convince her by the time I'm done that she can be as spiritual as the rest of us. And just because, like myself, she only believes in material things and material powers, that does not separate her or separate anyone from the kind of spiritual possibilities that are there. So I looked for a reading, which we always do during the chalice lighting, and found one that I thought fitted my purposes quite properly. One way in which it fits my purposes is from my childhood when I went to a Presbyterian church growing up. And the policy almost always to have a scriptural reading and have the sermon somehow be an elucidation or an expansion of that reading. And so that's the kind of thing I have done sometimes and wish to do again today. This particular thing comes from one of my favorite authors, Chuang-Tzu, translated by another one of my favorite authors, Thomas Merton, who spent his life, at least his adult life, in Gethsemane in Louisville, in which he lived both a spiritual life and a very political life and a very material life. So what I want to do today are two things. First, I want to briefly describe what spiritual typically means to most people, and then try to give a different kind of interpretation. I do not think that somehow one is right and the other wrong, or one is better and the other worse. These are simply two sides of spirituality, and I think that they ought to reflect each other in some way. So what does spirituality mean in its usual kind of meaning? I think it's pretty straightforward. A spiritual person is, unlike myself, someone who does believe in supernatural beings, supernatural powers. If you are a spiritual person, you somehow have contact with these. You become the voice for them, or they change what it is that you have to say, change what it is to do. You are a conduit, as it were, for the supernatural world. That supernatural world is invisible. It is not accessible to ordinary people unless they have some kind of a secret, some kind of a special power, which allows them, therefore, to speak for, to experience and speak for this supernatural world, and then communicate it to others, hoping to get them to have the same kind of secret power. You can see then, or we'll see in a moment, why it is that I chose this particular story of the woodcarver as a way of talking about spirituality, because I think this is a very spiritual story, and yet it begins, King, the master carver, made a bell stand of precious wood. A bell stand, by the way, is a stand for bells, sacred bells. It holds them up. It is a place in which the bell is presented. When it was finished, all who saw it were astounded. They said it must be the work of spirits. I think you can see quite easily exactly what's going on here. If this was some kind of amazing sort of creation, the only way it could be an amazing sort of creation is that it didn't just come from the carver, it came from the way in which supernatural powers and supernatural things passed through him and presented to the world. And therefore it must be the case that he must have secrets which enable him to do this. So the Prince of Lu goes to the master carver and says, "What is your secret?" And King replies, "I am only a workman. I have no secret." Now, he thought, although, of course, he thought in Chinese, he thought that he had done something spiritual, but it was not something that it was a secret. It was not something that had been the work of spirits that had somehow guided him. And that gives the possibility, therefore, as we proceed through this reading, of how it is that something can be spiritual for a person who just believes in wood and his ability to carve things and doesn't have any special kinds of supernatural secrets. King replied, "I am only a workman. I have no secret. There is only this. When I began to think about the work you commanded, I guarded my spirit." Now, the natural interpretation of this is the spirit is some kind of supernatural, invisible little thingy that is inside you. And that's what you have to guard against, presumably, somehow the tainting of this spirit by the physical world. But that's not what the woodcarver thought. To guard his spirit was to guard him from being distracted or led astray by things which would prevent him from making the bell stand which he had been commanded to give. There is only this. When I began to think about the work you commanded, I guarded my spirit, did not expend it on trifles that were not to a point. So what are these trifles? Well, he's quite clear about this. He fasts, and when you fast, you no longer take in those kinds of things from the outside which are going to somehow mislead you, somehow lead you astray from what you have been commanded to do, which is to create a sacred object to hold another sacred object. What are these trifles that are not to the point? Well, gain and success, or failure, whether or not he had a better reputation, whether or not people praised it, whether or not, perhaps even in the crudest kind of sense, he got paid a lot of money for it. But if anyone is an artist, you know that the approval and the appreciation and the adulation given to someone who is an artist is worth even more than money. I had forgotten praise and criticism. Again, it does not matter what other people say. Does not matter, I think here, what supernatural spirits may say. All of these are somehow distractions from what he had been commanded to do and he set out to do. By this time, all thought of your highness and of the court had faded away. All that might distract me from the work had vanished. I was collected in the single thought of the bell stand. I would like you to just stop and think when you are no longer distracted or led astray by all these kinds of trifles. The trifles are what other people think. The trifles are, what you think of yourself. The trifles are asking the question and answering the positive, Yes, indeed, I am a very powerful person who has secrets and can do things that nobody else can do. But these are all trifles. These are all things that mislead you. To be collected in the single thought of the bell stand is to focus on that and that alone. You're ready to see what it is that you set out to do, and the only way you can do that is to be centered. I really like and think here of the bell stand. Of the singing bowl. I asked you, as Carol so often does, to sit, center yourself, take a deep breath, collect yourself, look at other people, look around the world, but simply collect and center yourself in the sound of the singing bowl that you're ready to hear. Anything else are trifles. He says, I have no secrets, and by that he means I have no special supernatural kinds of insights or powers, but I do have the power to focus. I do have the power to collect myself. I do have the power to center myself. And when I do that, I am capable of doing things which I'm not going to be able to do if I am not focused and collected and centered in that way. Can you see why it is that I put as the title, Spirituality for a Scientist? Because that's exactly what good scientists do. They stop thinking about whether or not they're going to be famous. They stop thinking about whether or not they're going to be important and get promotions and all those sorts of things. And they stop thinking about simply the surface of things. I'll get back to that in a second, but this is what good scientists do. They pay attention to the heart and soul of matters, where soul does not mean some kind of special, invisible little thingy inside of you, but something about the essence of yourself. So he says, after I collected myself, after I put away all trifles, after I focused myself on what it is that I'm doing, I want to stop here for a second and ask you to ask yourself, how often am I like that? How often am I able to simply collect my thoughts and my feelings and my way of doing things on exactly what it is that I'm doing, instead of stopping to think? I got a paper from a student a long time ago in which he said he went to a Catholic school and he was asked, when he was supposed to stand in some quote-unquote spiritual place, performing some kind of sacred thing, usually bowed down in an uncomfortable kind of way, would instead start to think, oh, this itches, or my knee is now uncomfortable, or I wonder what I'm going to do after this is over, and so on, and so on, and so on. These are obvious kinds of distractions, but the basic distraction here is the distraction of thinking that it is only if you are focused completely on something different and special and supernatural that you can be really having a spiritual kind of experience. So the Master Carver here has collected himself, centered himself, focused himself, thinking only about what it is that he had to do, and then I went to the forest. Notice he didn't go to a church. He didn't go to a forest which is some kind of special sort of forest. You know, there are forests and forests, but then there are forests which are set aside as supernatural forests, sacred forests. You go there. I thought one time that there are various things that we deal with in that way. Water is sometimes held to be a sacred fluid because magical rituals have been passed over it, and it's been turned from just ordinary water into sacred water. And one response to that is to say, all water is sacred water. How could it not be? It is necessary for our sustenance. It's necessary for our life. It flows through everything all the time. Why would you think that by some kind of magical ritual, you could take water, which is already a very important thing, and turn it into something sacred? And the answer to that is really quite simple, by thinking that sacred and spiritual mean filled with some outside supernatural kind of power, which the ritual evokes and turns it into something else. When you say instead, all water is sacred water, now you go into it, you drink it, you wash yourself with it, thinking that all water can do this. And so that's what our Carver did. He went into the forest, and he says, to see the trees in their own natural state. Notice he doesn't say, to see trees in a supernatural state. Their natural state is quite sufficient. Their natural state is trees as trees. And there is the idea that all trees may have a sacred quality to them. He doesn't think that he sees all trees in this way, but he does see one. And it has a special kind of spiritual connotation to it, not because he has seen something supernatural in it, but it's what he was looking for to do the job that he was commanded to do and has been focused in that fashion. To see the trees in their own natural state. When the right tree appeared before my eyes, the bell stand also appeared in it clearly, beyond doubt. That is, it's not that the tree has turned into something else, but his way of perceiving had changed. And his way of perceiving was not to see something supernatural inside it someplace, but indeed to see it in its natural state, a state that is already sacred, a state that is sacred for all kinds of physical things. This is something that I believe rather deeply. To make the distinction between natural and sacred, or natural and spiritual, is to start down a path which at least doesn't work for me. I will not say that it doesn't work for other people, but it does work for me. And the way in which one can see things in their own natural state, and to be able to work with them, to be able to perceive them, be able to see the hidden potentiality there, is something which is special in your way of perceiving, not something which is supernaturally different in what it is that you're perceiving, or supernaturally different in the way in which you do it. It is a very natural thing. The title again was Spirituality and a Scientist. That's what scientists do. They see what is invisible to the eyes of others, not because they're seeing something supernatural, but because they're seeing the world as it is in itself. They come to it in a completely open fashion, not to confirm some prior thesis, but to see what it is that they might see that they would have missed because they had a preconception of what it is that's going on. I think the following is true, that almost all of us, whatever we experience and however we do it, we don't come to it with a blank slate. We come to it with a whole set of beliefs, a whole set of feelings, a whole set of ideas. And we will see, by God, as it were, what we are looking at in that kind of fashion, what our preconceptions bring to it. Good scientists are completely open to the possibilities. Do not decide beforehand. One of the best examples of that are Einstein's thought experiments. When he said, for instance, as I was riding on a train, I wondered if the train was moving or the train was sitting still and everything else was moving. Nothing in my experience distinguished between the two. It's all in the way in which one looks at it. And when a scientist is creative, and I'm looking forward in about 3 weeks to the sermon on, or the service on creativity, which Linda and I will be doing. And that kind of creativity, it's not coming up with some secret, special, amazing, miraculous kind of thing. It's just seeing what's going on without having decided beforehand what it must be. So what does the Carver do? He goes into the forest. He sees trees in their own natural state, as they are in themselves, not as they are when we have decided beforehand what it is that they are. And then the right tree, the one that has a heretofore hidden potential, now simply shows itself to him without any idea that this is something supernatural, simply what it already was, but now I have the capacity to see it. When the right tree appeared before my eyes, the bell stand also appeared in it clearly beyond doubt. And I love this next line. All I had to do was to put forth my hand and begin. I wish I could do that. To be so ready, so open, so capable of seeing things and other people and other experiences and other rituals as they are in themselves, without any preconception of a magical or special or outwardly given some kind of power. It's there already. And when it's there already, all I have to do is just put forth my hand and begin. I think this is the way, and I suspect women understand this better than men do, the way in which a mother can love their child. They just put forth their hand, and the child is there and is ready to listen to them and respond to them. Don't know, but I try to do it. With a child whom you love, a person whom you love, a group that you love, a society that you're struggling to love, to get to the point where all you have to do is just put forth your hand and begin. And it happens of itself. I probably don't need to say this again, but I will anyway. You don't need some supernatural power coming in from the inside. You just need not to be blocked by all the kinds of things that block us most of the time. That's why the earlier passage was important. I fasted. That is, I no longer fed myself with, look at me. Look how important I am. Look how special I am. Look at the amazing kinds of powers of understanding and creation that I have. Maybe I had those already, but I need to stop feeding myself these kinds of things and allow myself the possibility of simply acting without any further thought. If I had not met this particular tree, there would have been no bell stand at all. It's not because this particular tree is a supernatural tree. It's because this particular tree served the purpose that he had been given the command to work with. And because he had no distractions, no preconceptions, he was able to see it for what it was. If I had not met this particular tree, there would have been no bell stand at all. What happened? Notice now, what he's doing at the end of this is to answer the question that was given him. What is your secret? And he says, I have no secret. And it isn't a secret. It's something open to him, had always been open to him, as long as the stuff that gets in the way had been gotten rid of. What happened? My own collected thought encountered the hidden potential in the wood. I ask myself from time to time, how often does that happen? I'm able to focus. I'm able to center. I'm able to collect myself. And when I do that, I now see possibilities that I couldn't see before. Not because I have some kind of mystical sorts of secrets, but because I've gotten rid of the stuff that gets in the way. And I titled this Spirituality for the Scientist because that's what really creative scientists do. They see the same world that everybody else had seen, but they see it in a different fashion. I hope you can see now the kind of duality that I'm talking about here. One side says, when you experience something which seems to be something that is special, it's not because of some kind of supernatural secret that you're able to do this. They are very natural kinds of things that you do. You just don't do it any longer in our normal way, which is to be distracted and to think about trifles and wonder. My own collected thought encountered the hidden potential in the wood from this live encounter. I love the adjective live here. Isn't that a live kind of experience? When you are connected, not supernatural soul to supernatural soul, supernatural essence to supernatural essence, you simply have an encounter between two things which are completely natural, but also very powerful. And when you do that, I can call this, I think, a spiritual experience. From this live encounter came the work which you ascribe to the spirits. One last thing I want to do here, which I can only partly do justice to, is to talk about some of the other kinds of words and ideas which have the same kind of character. One of them, I think, is morality. There is a way of thinking of morality as, with great difficulty, following the rules that a supernatural being has given to us to follow. And we do it with great struggles, and we do it with great problems. There is another kind of morality, which is the kind of spirituality I'm talking about, in which by getting rid of the blockages, just seeing things as they are in themselves, particularly here, seeing what we are all supposed to believe in as you use, the special kind of quality of inherent value found in all human beings. You don't need a supernatural power to see the value inherent in all human beings. You just need to look at them, and look at them without kinds of things that block them. So it is a way of relating to other people. It's a way of relating to the social world. And some rules may be helpful here, but they're not helpful because they come from some supernatural source. They're helpful because these are the kinds of rules, with their exceptions, that fit the way in which we can be with other people as beings of inherent value. Again, I've thought about this stuff for a long time, and so please pardon me if I keep repeating the same thing. The inherent value in all human beings is not some supernatural thing that is inside them. It is what they already were. And the problem is that we don't see it. And if we just get rid of the things that block it, then we can see it. It doesn't need any special kind of moral courage. It just means collecting, centering, seeing them as they are, and as they are, like the tree which the wood carver saw in the forest, is something, some person who has real inherent value, as they are in themselves. I think of this in terms of understanding. There's a long tradition. By this time, I hope you're getting what I'm after. There's a long tradition. Real kind of understanding is understanding of mysterious, invisible kinds of powers that exist in another realm somehow. And what we want are people who are sent by God or the gods to tell us about these kinds of secrets that are out there. But it's not like that at all. Or at least it doesn't have to be like that at all. Understanding is just seeing things as they are. All you need to do is to get clear that what's going on is not that it's some kind of magical, supernatural experience, but simply an experience in which blockages have been removed, so that all you need to do is put forth your hand and begin. And finally, sacred. That which is sacred is simply what is. And the wood carver has the power to see that this tree is sacred, not because it's written on its surface, but because he has gotten rid of the ways in which he is prevented from seeing it. And he's not seeing some kind of woo-woo kind of thing inside the tree or inside of some other person, but simply what it is, who they are, as they are. Can I legitimately call this spiritual? Well, language, after all, is simply the particularly human effort to make a map of the world, to make a map of what we experience, to make a map of what we think, to make a map of what is there. And when you're asking what spirituality is, you're not asking a semantic question, what a word means in particular kinds of contexts. You are instead asking what sorts of things are similar to each other. And this is my justification for talking about the master carver and some of us, all of us, I hope, in our better moments, leading spiritual lives. It is an everyday life, but that doesn't stop it from being spiritual. And when it's not an everyday life, it's not because we have some secret mystical power to see the supernatural thingy inside things. It just means we look and we respond. And don't look and respond in terms of various kinds of egotistical things which usually affect us. Let me repeat something I said at the beginning. I'm not arguing, I would not have the temerity to argue that somehow this is what spirituality really is. It is for lots of people. We all know such people for whom spirituality means this kind of perception, transmission, experience of very special, invisible, supernatural kinds of things. And I'm certainly not saying they're wrong to use spiritual in that way. But I am saying there is a different way. One that is about the way in which we go about things, the way in which things get blocked off from us. And all we have to do is let them go. And now things will suddenly appear to us very simple. Everywhere we look, we see it. Enough. Questions, comments you have, because we are a UU congregation, and that's what UU congregations do. Yes, Jonathan.
Excuse me. Years ago, when I was involved in soccer refereeing, practicing it myself, teaching others, we had a term called flow.
Yes.
And flow was a state in which, in the game, you focused entirely on what was happening and shut out the outside world. And if there was someone over there criticizing you, you never heard it because of this state of flow. And so I think that's what one of the things that you were describing.
Can I just, yes, also called being in the zone. I love basketball, but I never got in the zone. But that's the way in which it's supposed to go. Yes, you're just focusing on what it is that you're doing. Go ahead.
Okay. In terms of spiritual, this is sometimes, there are kind of two aspects of viewing the human mind. There's the dual, or the human existence. There's the dualist, who think of you have a body and then you have a mind or spirit that is controlling the body. The other monists think of the mind as an emergent aspect of the physical body, not distinct from the physical body. And so I think the dualists are the ones who think of survival after death. The spirit is going to survive.
Yes.
A monist would say, no.
Nathan and I were talking about exactly that thing before service.
Okay. Now, within the mind, there seems to be, and the way it works interacts with the physical mechanism of the brain, there seems to be a subconsciousness that can act and does act largely independent of the conscious mind. So you're walking down the street, you see someone, you can't remember their name, you stop, you engage them in conversation, and then all of a sudden it comes to you. I think of this as a subconscious mind going to work and searching the memory banks of the mind until it finds the name and then pops it up into your conscious mind.
Yeah. And then because names are connected with particular memories, you think about particular things connected with that person now named. Yes.
Let's see. And with regard to the wood carver.
Yes.
Wood carver. I think when I have a project to do, I'll often plan it ahead of time, consciously and subconsciously, the steps to beginning and the intermediate steps all the way to the end, so that when you actually get engaged in the project, you'll know what each of the steps is. And so I think this wood carver must have engaged in this kind of planning as to how he was going to build this bell stand and all of the steps that involve. And so when he looks at a tree, he says, does this tree provide for all of the steps necessary to accomplish my goal? And in a sense, he's walking around and the subconscious mind suddenly says, hey, this satisfies all of the steps that allow you to build this bell stand. And this tree can do it and that tree can't. So.
I kind of want to repeat, there's more than one way to do things. That's your style. It's not my style. Doesn't have to be any style. It's two different ways of being prepared. The other thing I wanted to comment quickly, if I'm asked whether I believe that I have a soul, what I don't believe is that I have some tiny little imaginary, supernatural thing inside of me, which goes on in reincarnation from body to body, which continues through life, may go to some particular place. I think I have a soul, but not in that sense. Philosophers can be really annoying, because really all you need is one phrase. Well, that depends what you mean by fill in the blank. And with words like soul, like spirit, like supernatural, that's exactly the sort of thing you have to do. I don't believe I have a supernatural soul. I think I have a completely natural soul. And it is the essence of me and often invisible. Sometimes I suddenly gain an insight into myself, and it may well come from my subconscious. I don't know where it comes from, but I have to be ready to hear it. But there's nothing secretive about it. There's nothing supernatural about it. It is simply paying attention so that when the data comes in, you actually listen to the data rather than taking a hammer and jamming it into the form that you had previously decided you wanted to jam it into. We have taken enough time. Yes.
I guess this could go on for hours. It's a very interesting discussion. In the parable of the workman and the bell stand immediately made me think of all of those shipbuilders in the late 18th, 19th century who cut down thousands of live oaks in Louisiana and Mississippi to make the wooden warships of the day and the commercial ships of the day. And they did exactly what the bell stand maker did. They went and looked at the trees to find these very strong live oaks that had particular shapes that could be easily carved into the cornices and pieces that were needed to make a wooden warship. But they weren't doing it in the spirit of the bell stand maker. They were doing it, many of them were Christians doing it for the better glory of their God and for the power and glory of Spain or the United States or whichever nation state they were doing their construction for. So they had a different spirituality than the bell stand maker. Came at it probably from a very different perspective. And I was thinking that your concept of spirituality in many respects boils down to a view of ethics and how a person feels towards other people in the world and the natural world generally, and whether they feel like they need to conquer and divide or whether they need to love and respect. That spirituality is a matter of ethics, and certainly I would not think that the ethics or the spirituality of Vladimir Putin has anything to do with the spirituality or ethics that I would have or most UUs would have. So I don't know where to go with this thought, but there it is.
Can I just say one way to go with that thought? One thing I love about this process is if I'm listening, I hear things that I hadn't heard before. The phrase there is, I'm just a workman, as if a workman was some kind of blue-collar, unthinking sort of activity. And in one way, he certainly was a workman. He knew how to do kinds of things that you're talking about, knew the way in which wood would behave, because he'd worked with it a lot. But to think that workman is somehow opposed to or radically different from some kind of a person with spiritual abilities is, I think, to draw a conclusion which doesn't have to be drawn. Yes, Yetta.
So kind of two things come to my mind. One is, following on Jerry's comment, is that the idea of spirituality kind of has implicit in it the supernatural approach to spirituality or definition thereof implies that there is an ethical or moral good or bad, and that this supernatural being is good when we have no reason to really place any value judgment on whether that would be the case, or in the more mundane, natural definition of spirituality. I don't think there's any necessary connotation that there's a good or bad to whatever the feature is that is considered extraordinary. And then the second thought I had is...
Can I say something?
Sure.
First thought, you're absolutely right. When I taught world religions, again and again, I had young people saying, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. They hadn't really thought very much about what spiritual was, but this seemed the right thing to say. Religion meant some kind of blind, mechanical, going to church, doing these things, following rules, and so on. They didn't want anything with that. They wanted something which is higher flown, as it were. And one of the reasons I wanted to give this talk was to say, we could use the word spiritual, the word, right, to point to a different kind of activity, which has its own kind of power and its own kind of specialness here, and mundane talk about words with positive and negative connotations. Mundane is definitely negative. Mundane, just the ordinary, this is what's going on in the purely physical world. But it isn't just what's going on in the purely physical world. There are all kinds of possibilities and powers there. We just need to figure out how to be empowered by them, and we don't need to go to another realm in order to do that.
And I think one quote I heard, and I don't remember where I heard it, is that, if you're hearing voices in your head and you don't know you're not seeing the head and you don't know the source of it, you ought to be a little bit careful about following it, And then the other aspect is, obviously, this wood carver has spent years and years practicing, getting good at his craft, and when somebody comes to what he's produced, they haven't seen all of that effort, all of that practice, all of that learning and his process of gaining that skill over years and years and years. And you come to the end point and you just see this beautiful bell stand, and yes, it appears supernatural, but you're not seeing all of the effort that went into that. And I'm not sure how that relates to spirituality, but it seems like, it's not really possible to just, at one point in time, reduce or remove all of the distractions and immediately be able to produce something like that without putting in the effort to develop the skill.
So well said. I've got nothing to add to that. Someone else?
We hear the word blank slate.
Yes.
But I think it's pretty clear that the mind is never a blank slate. If you look at a weaver bird, they build these hanging nests out of straw. Now, I think it would be a real stretch of the imagination to assume that that little bird growing up is going to use its engineering background and look at the way this nest is built. And so when he grows up, then he'll build the nest the same way. There must be encoded in the DNA of the weaver bird code to build the mind in such a way that that bird knows how to build a nest. If you raised a dove in a weaver bird's nest, it's not going to make a weaver bird nest, it's going to make a dove nest. So with regard to things like morality, I think that is kind of an emergent property, so that when our mind and brain develops, the structures are there to deal with interactions between people in a more or less stable way. Well, I'll quit.
With regard to that, I liked Carl Sagan's distinction between talking about nurturing behavior as being part of a mammalian brain, but more the earlier evolutionary brain is reptilian, and there's a heck of a lot that comes from there too. We've got the whole sequence, not just the part we'd like to think of as being our real selves.
I think we're good. Leave here, have a good week. See you next week, or the choir on Tuesday night. And if you have any further thoughts, always ready to listen, or at least try to listen anyway.
Thank you.
Yes.